Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters of the Week video. As always, these entries come from the cryptids.wikia.com website, just a random page entry from there. And I wanted to go ahead and mix this one in because it's been about 2 or so weeks since my last cryptid video. This particular random page entry brings us to a very fascinating case of a creature that was encountered apparently just by maybe one person or more, depending on the anonymity associated with these encounters, and it's over in Sherman, New York. At first, I was just going to dismiss this entry because there's so little info associated with it, and even then, that information just seems so mysterious overall. But when I was looking at more info tied to the actual location itself, it suddenly dawned on me that there truly is a chance that these creatures are there. You know about that more in a minute when I go into further details as to why that is there, like as far as that link. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of them now. They are known as the Sherman Beasts. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating but brief information tied to these very mysterious creatures. So what are these Sherman Beasts? Well, apparently there's these two type of creatures, either one or two of them, that have been encountered by an anonymous 15-year-old boy there in Sherman, New York. Apparently he encountered it, and then maybe some of the other family members and potentially other witnesses. The only issue is a lot of this info is just really from an anonymous letter, and even then it's just from one source. And in this case, it happens to be this. This is a fascinating book. It's called The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, and it's written by John Keel. And in it, he goes over a whole bunch of unknown creatures, cryptids, and other type of beings that are here on this earth. Very, very fascinating when I was looking at some brief information associated with this book. Well, this guy, John Keel, received a letter from that young boy, from that 15-year-old boy, and he decided to include it there. So let's go ahead and let's start off with that information, and then that way it'll tell us what can be said of the Sherman Beast. So yes, indeed, apparently this anonymous 15-year-old boy stated this. His family lives in an area of Sherman, New York that's right next to a swampy location. At first I was thinking, how is there a swamp in New York? You know, one would never really think something along those lines. Usually you would picture something like Florida, for example. But no, as it turns out, it's absolutely true. There's a very, very large 62,000 plus acre area there known as the Great Swamp, which you're looking at some pictures of here. It stretches from Sherman, New York to New Fairfield, Connecticut, and probably some other areas. But yeah, it encompasses that entire location, and it's one big giant swamp. So this 15-year-old boy, his parents' house was right next to it, and he stated that sometime between 1965 up to the early 1970s, that's when he started to see these sloth-like beasts. He described them as being white, he described them as being colossal, like very, very large, and apparently not only would they stay on the swamp, but they would also come into the property itself. And in fact, I'll include this here. This is the actual excerpt from the letter in the actual book. So let's go ahead and let's share that information here. So this is what John Keel said. He said, letter from a young man in Sherman, New York. And then the letter itself starts. It says, I'm writing because about 3 or 4 years ago, circa 1965, 1966, I saw a white monster in a swamp beside our house. And I've been seeing these things ever since then and close to our house. And one night it came down to our yard. How creepy is that, right? You see something unusual like this and you realize that it's coming closer and closer. And then one day, there it is right in your backyard. And so the letter continues. It says, it stands between 12 and 18 feet high. Obviously, that's very, very tall, larger than any type of Sasquatch that stands out. And he continues, it has a long tail between 6 and 8 feet long. So that makes the body even longer at that point. And then he says, it is all covered with hair. They are always white. Very unusual, again, when you see something like that, unless the actual environment merits it, like we've seen in some other real-life animals. And then he continues by stating, I have seen them alone or two at a time. If that made me wonder if it's like a pair, like a mating pair of sorts. And then he concludes by stating, it can walk on 2 or 4 feet. It is almost a double for a prehistoric sloth. And my whole family has seen this thing, and I know of 2 2 or more men who have seen them. And then he finishes it by stating, I'm 15 years old and I am not kidding. I've seen these things and they are real. So that is the full letter from this anonymous young boy. Again, no name tied to him, no information as to exact location, nothing in terms of who his family is, nothing like that. All we know is just what was written in that anonymous letter in this book. But there have been some theories still as to what this Sherman Beast is. And when I was reading this information, it all tied back to that great swamp. Because when you think about it, something this large, something this bizarre looking, it probably could, a very good chance it could be within that large swamp-like area. It could easily just hide itself almost in plain sight, deep within that jungle-like atmosphere. Can you imagine that? Like there's something there probably less than 100 feet away, but because of the swamp-like conditions surrounding that environment, you would probably never see it. And then of course it would just be able to easily hide underneath the water and then be able to do so. And there's very little chance of anyone encountering it, because what purpose would somebody be there in that swamp-like location? I mean, there's not going to be any new construction. It's too expensive to do so in those swamp areas. That's why certain areas like in Florida never really have that type of construction, like new housing, roads, anything like that, because it's just too cost prohibitive to do so. So here you have this perfect environment that could easily shelter and house these Sherman Beasts. And again, they just happen to be named because of that location they're in, Sherman, New York. Now, as far as the theories as to what these creatures are, there's this. What's interesting is that I've talked about this creature already in the past. It's known as the mapinguari, and I'll include the link for it. I think I made this a couple of years back or so. In fact, my YouTube channel, when I was looking it up, was stating it was around 2015. So if you want to have a chance to see that, that'd be great. I'll include the link for it below. But these are hairy creatures that have these weird backwards feet. They have one eye. They have an exposed heart. That's the more sensational side of them. But a lot of people think that they're actually a long-lost relic, like they're known as the Megatherium, which is essentially a giant ground sloth. They were found somewhere in South America, but then also relegated to certain parts of North America. So the whole idea is this. This Megatherium could be that actual Sherman Beast there in Sherman, New York. Somewhere along the way, it just stayed after who knows how many of its others within the species ended up coming extinct, and then it just stayed there, and somewhere along the way, one or two of them have lasted this long. And remember, I was mentioning earlier, it could be a mating pair. If they just continue to stay that way, in terms of just staying close to each other, protecting each other, and staying in that hidden area, then there's a good chance that they could just continue living as is. There's even this theory as far as like its white color, because again, as I was mentioning earlier, the environment usually merits that. Obviously, you see some animals out there in Alaska, in particular, like the polar bear, perfectly camouflaged when it comes to its white fur. But you would think that something like that in the swamp-like marshlands would easily stand out. Well, the whole idea is maybe it's not even camouflage, but it's just through the form of inbreeding, and that's what it's causing this weird look when it comes to its fur. So either way, though, there's the idea that, yeah, it could be a mapinguari, or there'd be a long-lost relic when it comes to the Megatherium. There's even one more theory, and then that's this. It's an unknown, unclassified, just completely out there new cryptid that's part of a subject matter known as the megafauna. Megafauna is more along the lines of large animals that used to exist in tandem. They used to rule entire lands, but as evolution started to change things, it made smaller animals outlive them, and then there may be just the last few relics associated with it. When I was thinking that information, it reminded me of the Kong movie, how Kong is like the last one when it comes to his particular species. Obviously, all the other ones died out, and all of the smaller ones, all the smaller animals took over that island. So maybe something like that could easily work in this case. The only problem is, again, so much information is considered unknown, it's considered missing, it's considered anonymous when it comes to these Sherman Beasts, considering that this book was written all those years back in the 1970s, and you have no other encounters still to this day in Sherman, New York. Someone brought up a good point. They said you would think that in the New York area you would have far more encounters considering the larger number of people there. But no, they've remained very, very hidden to this very day. So is this fake? Is it a hoax? Is it the real deal? Are these animals truly there? They just happen to be very well at hiding themselves. Who knows? But all the information is still up in the air. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. Maybe any clues, any identity as to who that resident was, that 15-year-old boy there from Sherman, New York, or more likely the location within those 62,000 plus acres, then that would be really, really great to hear too. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.